his earliest days when Jesus was teaching in Galilee, when he was surrounded by grain, he spoke about God in terms of a sower and some seed. He spoke about heaven in terms of wheat and harvesting. That was back in the early days when Jesus walked through the fields and the farmlands of Upper Galilee. Alongside the lake, when he was on the Sea of Galilee, he changed metaphors. There, Jesus spoke about fishermen and nets. And later, when he was passing through Samaria, speaking to a woman who was drawing water from a well, Jesus spoke about God in terms of a life-giving spirit, water welling up from within. Each parable or each metaphor that Jesus used was appropriate to the specific audience and their daily experiences. On a hillside, for example, Jesus spoke of God's kingdom in terms of lilies of the valley and birds of the air. When he was walking through a vineyard, Jesus told the story about some vineyard workers who were disgruntled with their pay. And he offered that wonderful illustration of connectedness to God's Spirit when he said, I am the vine, you are the branches. See, each of these metaphors or parables reflects everyday experiences. They are accessible to everybody in their audience. They were appropriate to the business at hand, farming, fishing, daily chores in the home, experiences that village people knew very well. In today's reading from the Gospel of John, Jesus speaks about God in terms of a door to a sheep's pen, a door to the pasture. And he articulates the qualities of a good shepherd. Now, if his pattern was consistent, as I believe it was, speaking in terms that were most easily understood, immediately relevant to his audience, we would expect Jesus to be using these pastoral images, these flocks of sheep, with a group of shepherds out on the hillside in Judea, maybe even among those very same shepherds near Bethlehem who had sung and celebrated his birth at Christmas. But no, this time it seems Jesus entirely missed his audience. He is not in the countryside. He's in the capital city. He's in Jerusalem. And here he should be talking about merchants and politicians, right, getting ready for the election. He should be talking about priests and Romans who are occupying his city. He should be addressing the corrupt dynasty of King Herod's ruling monarchy. In Jerusalem, you would expect Jesus to do some city talk, temple talk, maybe even taxpayers' grievances in the capital city. It really looks as though Jesus missed his audience when you read on to what happened as a result of these sayings about the gatekeeper of the sheep and the qualities of a good shepherd and the failings of the hirelings who don't really care about the flock. You see, immediately following these words in John's Gospel, words in which Jesus refers to himself as the sheep's door and offers himself to be the good shepherd, words that give us Christians a warm, godly glow of acceptance, the people in the temple picked up stones to kill him. The authorities tried to arrest him. They put a warrant for his arrest until he fled the town. So what is it about these shepherd and sheep stories in John's Gospel that so enraged the civic leaders, the religious leaders in the temple? See, I would have thought they had nothing to do with herding sheep. They're priests. They're politicians. They're not shepherds. The only sheep that they ever saw were the ones that were being brought in for sacrifice, or in the market as meat, or for the value of their fleece, their wool, their skin. Even though the religious leaders were not themselves shepherds, literally, technically, they were certainly familiar with the system of marketing sheep, that there were people out in the villages who owned the flocks, and they hired day laborers to serve as their shepherds. Why would Jerusalem's civic leaders get so bent out of shape over Jesus' words about sheep and shepherds? Let's hear his words again, recalling that Jesus said these words in response to the Pharisees' question, "Are we also blind?" Jesus said, "The one who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To this one the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear this one's voice, calling each one by name, and this one leads them out. When all have been brought out, this one goes before them. The sheep follow because they know this one's voice. A stranger they will not follow. They will flee because they do not know the voice of strangers." This figure Jesus used with them, but they did not understand. Unquote. Well, what's not to understand? I think the metaphor is perfectly clear. If you asked the sheep whose they were, if they could answer you, they'd say, "We belong to the shepherd who leads us, the one who knows us by name." If you asked the gatekeeper, again, the only right answer would be, well, they belong to the shepherd who cares for them. The gatekeeper's not going to open to the sheepfold to a stranger who doesn't care for the sheep. I mean, like, duh. And the sheep are not going to follow some stranger's voice. Whose sheep are these? The shepherds. If you ask the sheep, or if you ask the gatekeeper, or if you ask the shepherd, he would say, "These are my sheep. I know them. I care for them. I put my life on the line for them. Anyone else getting a hold of them is a robber, a thief. His only desire is to destroy them, right? To use them, to consume them, to sell them, slaughter them." See, seems simple enough, doesn't it? What is there to misunderstand? I mean, what other answer is even possible? The sheep belong to the shepherd who cares for them, right? Okay? Well, no. City folk see it differently. The Pharisees would say, no, the sheep belong to whoever owns them. And ownership is determined in the marketplace. You buy and sell title to property, right? And whoever has the right to sell the animal ultimately is the owner. And therefore, most likely, it's not the shepherd who cares for the sheep, but the landlord who owns the sheep. And property, you know, with all of its derivative power, can be bought and sold and even inherited, regardless whether the sheep know it or the shepherd knows it or the gatekeeper knows it. David, for example, who wrote the 23rd Psalm that we talked about last Sunday. Long ago, before David was the king of Israel, he had been a shepherd. David cared for sheep. He fought off bears and lions to protect them. He sang to soothe them. He never let even one of his little ones get lost. David was a shepherd, yes, but he didn't own the sheep. They belonged to his father, Jesse, who could do with them as it pleased him. David was just the shepherd who cared for the flock, not the owner. Similarly, Moses, when he encountered the burning bush, he was serving as a shepherd. But the flocks that he was leading through the Sinai desert were not his. They belonged to his father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian. See, landlords and merchants could make the case that sheep don't belong to the shepherds who care for them. The shepherds and their flocks belong to them. The shepherd's just a hired worker. The sheep are cash crops. They're property to be traded in the market for maximum profit. See, the market is their game, so they make up the rules for it. They define the terms of ownership. And you know, that's today we say that's Wall Street for you, right? They write the rules they then live by. We just have to live with it. They make the big bucks because they know how the game is played. When sheep were brought into Jerusalem, they were headed for market. They were not coming in to find pasture. The best lambs would be taken to the temple trading post to be sold as spotless sacrifices for the high priest's altar, which was like a big barbecue pit. Less than perfect sheep would stay out in the general market for the rest of the people, to be sold for milk or for wool, or sold for breeding purposes, or sold for slaughter and human consumption. Whether it was a shepherd who had brought a select few from his flock, or a thief who had stolen some in hopes of a quick profit. In the Jerusalem market, it didn't really matter. Sheep were property. They had no value apart from the price which could be gotten for them. It didn't matter what their names were. It didn't matter whose voice they recognized. Ownership was simply a matter of one question: who gets the money for them? Who is, we could say, their pimp, right? Who is the one who's trafficking them? Who is the merchant who will gain? Now, can you imagine when Jesus saw flocks of living sheep, and the shepherds as well, become devalued in the name of the almighty dollar? Even worse, they're being devalued in the name of Almighty God, that he became a bit angry. You recall how he grabbed a whip and he drove the merchants and their sacrificial lambs out from the temple in Jerusalem, saying, "This house is supposed to be a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it into a den of thieves, robbers." Yes, these are the same Pharisees. These are the same temple priests, the same political rulers who had already been offended by Jesus for disrupting their trade way back in chapter 2 of John's Gospel. And now we're 8 chapters further along, and these priests and Pharisees question him. And Jesus tells them point blank, the sheep are not theirs to do with as they please. They belong to the shepherd who cares for them, the one who tends them, whose voice they recognize. That's the only claim of title recognized by God. The question is, who cares for you? Obviously, they who ran the sacrificial system